All right, welcome back, Hononegah, Algebra 1. Today we're going off the books a little bit and we're going to talk about factoring polynomials by what's called grouping. So factoring by grouping is a specific type of factoring that is used when you're factoring four-term polynomials. Now, it can also be used in factoring other types, and some of the teachers will probably be showing you some factor by grouping ways, how to do trinomials using factor by grouping. So factoring is used to solve different types of problems. So we've already talked about factoring with the greatest common factor, and so this will be another way of factoring. So let's warm up by doing some GCF problems. So this is yesterday's. So now, 6x cubed minus 18x. I'm looking for the greatest number and or letter I can take out of both. So they are both divisible by 6, so I can take that out of both. And I can take one x away from both. And so it's dividing by the number and taking out the letter. So if I divide by 6 and take away 1x, and divide by 6 and take away 1x. So the next one, there's just 3 of them instead of just having 2. So all of them are divisible by 2. And I can take away a squared from each one. And so again, dividing by the number and taking away the letter. So I divide by 2 and take away 2 a's. And so next one, I divide by 2 and take away 2 a's. And the last one, now this is an interesting case. Anytime you're dividing and taking away and everything is gone, so I divided by 2 and took away a squared, you always need to leave a placeholder because 2 divided by 2 would be 1. Remember, taking out a GCF is the same as, or the opposite operation to, distributing. So if I distributed this back in, I would end up getting the original back. And so the last one here is just a review of section 7.2. We talked about multiplying. So multiplying the first one times each one. So I get 2x cubed minus 6x squared minus 5x. And then positive 6x squared minus 18x minus 15. And then add anything that's alike. So I have a 2x cubed. The x squareds end up canceling each other out. Minus 23x minus 15. So a couple of review questions there. So now let's get into actual grouping. When factoring, always look for a GCF first. In some cases, there's not a GCF for all the terms of the polynomial. If you have 4 or more, and this is the key here, 4 or more terms, then with no GCF, then you will factor by grouping. First, you're going to look for a GCF in half of the terms. So look for a GCF first. Then group the first 2 terms together and group the last 2 terms together. And then factor out the common binomial. And we'll talk to that in just a second. So here we go. Notice you have 4 terms. I'm going to circle 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Anytime you have 4 terms, you're going to basically break this problem in half. And so I want to do the GCF of just the first 2 terms. So if I was just looking at the first 2 terms, I can take out 2 x's and be left with x plus 3. If I did the same thing to the second set of terms, I can take a 2 out and be left with an x plus 3. That will happen every single time. You'll notice that the parenthesis in the first one is the same as the parenthesis of the second one. Now comes for the grouping. Anytime you have the exact same parenthesis in both of these, you can group what's in front as one parenthesis and keep what's the same as the other. Now, there's some mathematics behind that, and I'm going to actually show that to you, but this is factor by grouping. So I see 4 terms. I did the GCF of the first 2, the GCF of the second 2, and then because the parentheses were the same, I can group the GCFs and group what's the same. And I'm going to give the mathematics behind it here. So I'm going to scroll down here. All of you know that if you did 7x plus 3x, that the answer is 10x. But some of you probably don't know why. Because what you're technically doing is, because both of these have the exact same item, you can group the coefficients and keep what's the same. And so notice that the 7 and the 3 you can add together. You wouldn't actually do this step, but that's why this works. Because if you have the same variable, you can add their coefficients. So going back up here, because you have the exact same parentheses, you can add their coefficients. So let's do the next one now. I'm going to break this up into two questions now. GCF of the first two. So I took out an x squared. So I took two x's away from each one of these. And then the second one, I can take out a positive 3 out of both. The key is that you're going to end up getting a situation in which these two parentheses are going to be exactly the same. So if they're not the same, you probably did the wrong GCF or made a mistake somewhere. Group the GCFs. So x squared plus 3 becomes one parenthesis. And what's the same as your other? So that is factor by grouping. A little more complicated GCF. So I'm going to take 3a away from the first two. So the GCF of just the first two is a 3 and an a. So if I divide by 3 and take away an a. The second one, I can only take away a b from both. Look, we have the exact same parentheses. So I group the GCF and keep what's the same. Now this one's a little more complicated. There will be some people that will struggle on this one. All right, I see 4 terms. So I'm going to do the GCF of the first two. I'm going to take out a 3 and an x squared. Now, I'm looking at the second one. I'm like, there's nothing that comes out. There's no GCF whatsoever. For the purposes of grouping, then, I can take out a 1. So ultimately, I didn't really take anything away. I just took a 1 away, which now means I have the exact same parenthesis. So I group the coefficients in one parenthesis and keep what's the same as the other. So it's about taking out the GCF, getting the exact same parenthesis, and group. Next one, GCF of just the first two. So now I'm going to take out 3 b's out of the first two. If there is a negative sign in front of, you're going to take a negative out with it. So not only are they divisible by 4, but I would take out a negative 4. Now remember, you're dividing by that number. So if I divide by negative 4, I get a positive 6b. And if I divide by negative 4, I get a positive 5. So taking out a negative changes the signs for both of them. Look, parentheses are the same. Group the greatest common factors. That should be b cubed. I'll fix that. And keep what's the same in both. One more time. Again, we're just continuing the same process. I'm going to take out an x squared out of the first two. And I'm going to take out a negative and a 2 out of the second. So again, remember, you're taking out a negative 2. So I'm changing the signs or dividing by that negative. So 4 divided by negative 2 and 6 divided by negative 2. Parentheses are the same. Group what's in front and keep what's the same. So that's where the grouping comes in. Factor these by grouping. Hit the pause button. All right, so we're going to try this here. Move this down just a little bit. Factor by grouping the top one. I'm going to take out an x squared. I'm going to take out a positive 6. And because they are the same, I group the coefficients and keep what's the same. Second one, 5v squared. Remember, when you take out the entire item, you have a 1 left over. So I took out a 5v squared. Second one, I need to take out a negative and a 7. So it gets you a 2v minus 1. And yes, they are the same. So group the greatest common factor and keep what's the same. That concludes the factor by grouping. Please make sure you talk to your teacher. I believe today's assignment is a worksheet. Please check the Google Classroom for your teacher. And if you have any questions, let your teacher know. And good luck.